It's day 124 of our journey through the Bible. We come to the book of Jonah. Jonah is a name that means the dove, and it refers to a prophet who most people know of as one who was swallowed by the great fish before he obeyed God's command to preach repentance to the Assyrian city of Nineveh. Jonah was not always a reluctant prophet for the Lord. He's the same prophet who predicted the remarkable expansion of Israel's territory during the reign of Jeroboam II. You can read about that in 2 Kings 14, verse 25. This passage indicates that Jonah, the son of Amittai, was from Gath-Hepher, a town in Zebulun in the northern kingdom of Israel. While Jonah is described as a servant of the Lord, he is a sad and somewhat tragic figure in the book that bears his name. I think it's a real mark of the integrity and reliability of the Bible that a prophet like Jonah is described in such a candid manner. The natural tendency of human writers would be to obscure and to hide such a character. But the Spirit of God presents valiant heroes along with petty people to illustrate truth, no matter how weak and unpleasant these characters may have been. We know nothing of Jonah after he returned to Israel from his preaching venture in Nineveh. This book, by his name, emphasizes that God has a love for all people, pagans and Gentiles, as well as the Israelites. The book begins with God's call to Jonah to preach in the great city of Nineveh, capital of the Assyrian Empire. Well, as staunch political enemies of the Israelites and as worshippers of false gods, the Assyrians also were shunned as pagans and outcasts. But God's call to Jonah showed clearly that he had not given up on Assyria. The prophet was to call Nineveh to repentance, warning the nation of its approaching doom unless it turned to God. Instead of obeying God's command and heading to Nineveh, Jonah, you remember, caught a ship traveling in the opposite direction. At sea, a great storm arose, and Jonah was tossed overboard by the superstitious sailors in an attempt to appease the prophet's God. Jonah escaped unharmed when he was swallowed by a great fish and was miraculously deposited on shore. This time he obeyed God's command and traveled to Nineveh to carry out his preaching assignment. But the reluctant prophet was not prepared for the results of his message. The entire city repented, and Jonah sulked in anger because Nineveh had escaped God's punishment. To teach the prophet a lesson, God raised up a plant, perhaps a gourd vine, to shade Jonah from the sun, and then he allowed a worm to cut it down. A hot wind from the east added to Jonah's misery, and he whined and complained about the missing plant. Then God reminded Jonah that he was a God of compassion, who had the right to love and forgive pagans, even Assyrians, or for that matter, any other people who turned to him in obedience and faith. Jonah had been fretting about a plant, while God had turned his attention to a much more important matter, the worth and the salvation of people. There are many wonderful truths in this book for all of us. We'll return to it tomorrow. If you have a chance, I encourage you to read the whole book, maybe tonight. You'll be glad you did. Let me read from the first chapter. Verse 5. Then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God, and they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down into the inner part of the ship and laying down and was fast asleep. So the captain came and said to him, "What do you mean, you sleeper? Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us that we may not perish." And they said to one another, "Come, let us cast lots that we may know on whose account this evil has come upon us." So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, "Tell us on whose account this evil has come upon us. What is your occupation, and where do you come from? What is your country, and of what people are you?" And he said to them, "I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." Then the men were exceedingly afraid and said to him, "What is this that you have done?" For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord because he had told them. And they said to him, "What shall we do to you that the sea may quiet down for us?" For the sea grew more and more tempestuous. He said to them, "Pick me up and hurl me into the sea. Then the sea will quiet down for you, for I know it is because of me that this great tempest has come upon you." Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to get back to dry land, but they could not, for the sea grew more and more tempestuous against them. Therefore they called out to the Lord, O Lord, do not let us perish for this man's life, and lay not on us innocent blood. For you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you. So they picked up Jonah and hurled him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows.